My name is Margaret Trask. Everybody calls me Maggie. I'm 47 years old, and for 16 years my family believed I answered phones in the records office of a courthouse 3 states away. Then, on a Sunday morning in June, my mother put both hands on my face in her own kitchen, gently, the way you'd hold a child who'd fallen, and asked me to confess to a felony my sister committed. There was a man in intensive care 60 miles away with his pelvis broken in 4 places. He'd been hit on the shoulder of Route 41 and left in the weeds. My sister had been driving my truck. My father added it up out loud at the counter the way he adds up everything. He said, "Vivian has a campaign. Maggie, you've got nothing to lose." And my sister didn't even put down her coffee. She just smiled at me over the rim of the cup and said, "Who's going to believe you anyway?" There was a lawyer already sitting at that counter before a single one of them asked me a single question. And they were so sure of my answer that they'd already typed my confession and dated it. What none of them knew about my job, about what my truck had been recording that night, about the woman who was sitting up awake in the front room when my sister came home, took that family apart one piece at a time over the next 7 weeks. If you've ever been the one your family decided to underestimate, stay with me. This one is for you. I drove 9 hours to Baird County, Tennessee, because a 12-year-old asked me. My niece Sophie sent me a message in May. She said Grandma and Grandpa were having their 45th anniversary party, and please come, Aunt Maggie. And she put a little heart at the end of it. That was enough. That's all it ever takes with the good ones. I hadn't set foot in that house in almost 4 years. It looked exactly the same, which is its own kind of insult. Yellow clapboard, black shutters, a porch that runs the whole front. 2 hydrangea bushes my mother has been correcting the color of for 30 years. And out by the mailbox, a sign in that particular shade of red she picked herself. Vivian Trask Doyle, State House, District 12. Inside the mudroom door, on top of the old pie safe, there's a chipped blue mixing bowl. Every set of keys in that family goes in it the second you step through the door. My mother started that when I was 8 years old. She called it hospitality. Nobody blocking anybody in. Everybody stays for pie. It was never hospitality. It was inventory. My mother has always liked to know where everything is. I drop my keys in the bowl like everybody else. Truck keys on a plain steel ring, no fob cover, nothing fancy. In the front room there's a wall of pictures in gold frames. I'm in 7 of them. The newest one is from a graduation that happened 16 years ago. After that, the wall just keeps going without me. Christmases, Sophie's christening, the sister's engagement, the sister swearing in to the county board, a boat, a beach, a Thanksgiving table with 11 people at it. And here's the thing nobody understands about a wall like that. Nobody sat down and voted me off it. There was no meeting. It just closed over the space where I'd been the way water does. My father found me by the sweet tea and walked me over to 2 men in golf shirts. One of them owns the propane company. The other one had been a county commissioner for 20 years. My father put his hand flat on my back and said, "This is our oldest. Maggie does something with paperwork at a courthouse up north." The propane man nodded, polite as anything. I shook his hand and said it was real nice to meet him. And I let it stand. I always let it stand. I'd been letting it stand so long, it had stopped feeling like a decision and started feeling like weather. Being invisible was the one thing that family ever let me be good at, and honey, I had gotten excellent at it. By 10:30, the party had thinned down to the people who never leave. My sister Vivian was still going. Vivian has a face that always knows where the camera is, even when there isn't one. She'd been drinking since about 4 in the afternoon, not a lot by her standards. And I want you to sit with the fact that a sentence like that exists in a family. Somebody remembered the folding tables were still out at the equipment barn past the tree line, and the yard signs with them. My mother said it could wait until morning. Vivian said it absolutely could not, because 2 volunteers were coming at 7 and it would look, and this is the word she used, unserious. I said good night and went up to the back bedroom. Second door on the left, top of the stairs, my old twin bed and a closet full of my mother's winter coats in zippered bags. You can hear the mudroom from up there. You always could. I heard the keys shift in that blue bowl, that flat wooden rattle they make, and I heard the screen door bang twice on the frame the way it has since 1994. And I thought absolutely nothing of it. I read for a while. At about 5 minutes to midnight, I heard the garage door go up and come back down. Then 2 voices in the kitchen underneath me. Low, not arguing. I want to be precise about this because I have thought about it 10,000 times since. It didn't sound like an argument. It sounded like arranging. I fell asleep. When I came down for water sometime after 1 in the morning, that blue bowl on the pie safe was empty, not one key in it, in a house with 5 vehicles in the drive. I noticed it the way you notice a picture hanging crooked in somebody else's hallway, and then I went back up the stairs and I did not think about it again for 30 hours. I should have. The 7 o'clock news came on while I was standing at the coffee pot the next morning. A man had been struck on Route 41 near the old quarry turnoff just before midnight, left there. He was 66 years old. He was in critical condition at Baptist Memorial. A passing witness had seen a dark pickup heading east and part of a plate. Then the anchor moved on to a story about a fish fry. I stood there with the pot in my hand and felt the temperature of that house change around me. My father had been shut in his office since 6, which does not happen on a Sunday, and I could hear him through the door using the voice he saves for people who owe him something. Vivian didn't come down. My mother said she had a sick headache. I went out to the drive for my overnight bag and found my mother already out there at 7:15 in a cardigan over her nightgown, wiping the inside edge of the garage door frame with a dish towel. She smiled at me and said the pollen this year had been just unbelievable. My truck was parked at the end of the row, and it was not where I'd left it. I back in. I always back in. I backed in since I was 19. It was sitting nose first. I walked around to the front of it. The right headlight housing had a crack running through it like ice on a pond. There was a scrape of something pale along the bumper, low, maybe 18 inches long. And the whole front panel was clean. Not clean the way a truck is clean. Clean the way something is clean when a person has gone at one spot of it with a rag. I stood there with my hand on the hood. My mother came up the drive behind me, and she did not ask what I was looking at. She just said, "Come on inside, Maggie, family meeting." Bo Kessler was already at the kitchen counter. Bo has been my father's lawyer since before I could drive. He taught me to bait a hook off the dock at Picket Lake when I was 9 years old. He had a yellow legal pad in front of him and a cup of my mother's coffee, and he had been there long enough to finish it. That was the first thing that told me exactly what kind of warning this was going to be. They didn't call a lawyer after they talked to me. They called a lawyer instead of talking to me. My father came in and sat down and did not say good morning. And then they started talking, and I need you to hear how they talked, because that's the whole story right there. Nobody said, "Is he going to live?" Nobody said his name, not once. They said exposure. They said the next 72 hours. They said, if this gets a shape before we give it one. Bo said the phrase, a manageable outcome, twice, like a man patting a dog. My mother poured more coffee. And underneath all of it, in pieces, the actual facts assembled themselves in front of me like furniture coming out of a box. Vivian had taken keys out of that blue bowl around 11:30. Vivian had taken my truck because it was the last one in and nothing was blocking it. Vivian had been drinking since 4. Vivian had come back at 5 to midnight with a cracked headlight and a scrape on the bumper, and my mother had made her a cup of chamomile tea. Nobody called 911. Nobody drove back out to Route 41. A man lay in the weeds beside a stalled church van for 22 minutes before a hauler on his way to Nashville saw the reflectors and stopped. Then Bo slid a sheet of paper across the counter, turned so it faced me. Already typed, already dated. It was a confession. Mine. I read it twice. It said I had borrowed the vehicle. It said I was unfamiliar with the road. It said I had panicked. Somebody had put the word panicked in my mouth at 10 minutes after 7 in the morning. My mother came around the end of that counter and took hold of my face with both hands, and she looked at me with more warmth than she had shown me in 4 years, and she said it plainly, kindly, like she was helping me. "Just say you were driving, sweetheart." I asked her if she understood what she was asking me to do. She said she understood it exactly, and that's why I had to be me. No husband, no children, no campaign, a job nobody could name. My father never got up. He looked at me over his reading glasses and laid it out the way he'd lay out a feed bill. "Vivian has a campaign," he said. "You've got nothing to lose." There it is, the entire family ledger in one sentence said out loud in front of a lawyer, and not one person in that kitchen flinched. Vivian came in then, hair up, no makeup, in an old sweatshirt, and poured herself a coffee while I told them no. I said it once, evenly. Then I said it again, because the first one didn't seem to land anywhere. Bo said maybe we all needed to take a breath. My father said we did not have time to take a breath, and my sister leaned back against the sink with that cup in her hand and looked at me the way you look at a dog doing a trick badly. She wasn't even angry. That was the worst part. She said, "Who's going to believe you anyway?" I picked my jacket up off the back of the chair. I got as far as the doorway. And then my father said one more thing, and it stopped me with my hand on the frame. "Vivian already gave her statement," he said. 6:40 this morning. Your name's in it." I turned around. Joe Kessler would not look at me. That's how I knew it was true, and that's how I knew he'd helped write it. She had told an investigator that her sister was visiting from out of state, that her sister had asked about the highway on-ramp, that her sister had gone out around 11:30. Not an accusation. Better than an accusation, a helpful detail from a cooperating family. I stood in that doorway and did the arithmetic they were absolutely certain I couldn't do. The truck is registered to me. The witness saw a dark pickup and half a plate. I was asleep alone in a back bedroom with nobody to say otherwise. And the first person to hand the police a story owns the shape of the story. Everybody who comes after is just a person disagreeing. My father was watching my face while I worked it out, and he thought what he was seeing was fear. It wasn't. It was recognition. I spent 9 years as a public defender standing next to people who got convicted of things they did not do. And almost none of them lost on the evidence. They lost because somebody got there first. So I put my jacket back on the chair. Not because they'd won, because leaving Baird County that morning would have been the single most useful thing I could possibly have done for them. The out-of-state sister who came for one night and ran. They knew a version of me that was 16 years out of date, and not one of them had ever bothered to check whether it had been revised. That was their first mistake. It was not going to be the expensive one. I have to tell you what happened when I was 26, because it's the foundation the whole house sits on. My grandmother got sick in my second year of law school. Stroke, then another one. There was nobody else. My sister was 19 and being groomed, and my parents were building something. So I withdrew for 2 semesters, and I went home, and I sat with that woman, and I fed her applesauce off a spoon for 14 months. The fall my father was 7 weeks out from his first county race, and a man running for office needs a story that makes him human. At a fish fry at the fairgrounds, in front of about 300 people who sell insurance and buy gravel, he told them his oldest girl had gone off to law school and just couldn't hack it. He shrugged. He said, "Well, you can't win 'em all." And that room laughed, and he got exactly the warmth he was after. My mother was standing right beside him. Afterward, out in the gravel lot by the trucks, I asked her how she could stand there and let him say that. She straightened my collar. She was gentle about it. That's the part I remember best, how gentle her hands were. She said, "Honey, this family doesn't deal in facts. It deals in a story, and the story has to hold." I went back. I finished. I passed the bar on the first try in February, and I never told a single one of them. I took a public defender job 400 miles north, and I learned something in my first year that I mistook for wisdom for the next 16 years. If you don't tell people anything, they can't take anything. So I stopped telling them things. I stopped correcting the paperwork joke. I stopped sending news. When I made partner track at a firm, they didn't know. When I took the federal magistrate seat, they didn't know. And when I was sworn in as a United States District Judge 2 years ago, I stood in a robing room and buttoned that collar myself alone because I had not invited one single person who shared my last name. I told myself for 16 years that the silence was dignity. It took a man bleeding in the weeds beside a church van to show me what it actually was. By Sunday afternoon, the State Highway Patrol had taken the case from the county because Harold Bissett had gone from critical to still critical, and the charge was going to be a felony either way. His name was Harold. Everybody called him Hal. 66 years old, retired mail carrier, 31 years on the same rural route. He had pulled over that night because a church van full of teenagers coming back from a lock-in had blown a tire on the shoulder. He was setting out the reflective triangles. He was setting out triangles so nobody would get hurt. A sergeant named Della Krause called the house and said she'd be scheduling interviews with everybody who had been at the residence Saturday night. My father took that call in the hallway with his hand cupped over the receiver. Joe came back at 4 with a cleaner draft of my statement. The word panicked was gone. It had been replaced with became disoriented. He set it on the coffee table and told me there was no rush at all, and then he said the district attorney's office would want something by a week from Thursday, which is a rush. That's how it always works. Somebody tells you there's no pressure and hands you a deadline in the same breath, and you're supposed to only hear the first part. I went out on the back porch and called a woman named Rosalind Vega. I'd sat across a courtroom from her 11 years earlier and never forgotten her. I told her everything in about 4 minutes. She asked me 2 questions. Had I said anything to any investigator? I had not. Had I touched my vehicle? I said only the hood. She said, "Good. Don't touch it again. Don't be alone in a room with any of them. I'll be there Tuesday." I sat out on that porch after he hung up and looked down the drive at my truck with its cracked headlight, sitting there in the June heat with the cicadas going. And there was one thing in that truck that not one of them knew existed. It had been recording since the second somebody turned the key. And the whole problem, the entire problem for the next 5 weeks was that I could not go take it. People think a modern vehicle is a vehicle. It is not. It's a witness that never blinks and doesn't care who's paying for the funeral. Mine's a 2000 Innie half-ton. 2 years ago I hit a deer on a dark county road, and after that I put a dash cam on the windshield because I'm the kind of woman who doesn't want to have an argument later. That camera runs whenever the engine does. And the truck itself does 3 things that nobody thinks about when they sign the paper at the dealership. It keys the driver profile to the key fob so the seat and the mirrors move to whoever's holding it. It pairs to a phone automatically, and it writes that down, which phone, connected at what time, disconnected at what time. And it has an event data recorder that wakes up when the impact sensors feel something hard enough and saves the 5 seconds on either side of it. Speed, brake, throttle, steering angle. Monday morning I sat in the passenger seat with the door open and one boot on the gravel, and I turned the screen on and I did not touch one other thing. Driver profile. Guess the seat was 4 inches forward of where I keep it. My sister is 5'4". I'm 5'9". And under the paired device list, there was a phone that had not been there Saturday morning. V. Doyle iPhone. Connected 11:34 p.m., disconnected 11:59 p.m. I looked at that for a long moment. Then I turned the screen off, got out, shut the door, and I took nothing. Not the camera card, not one thing. I want to be clear about why, because it is the single most important decision in this entire story. I'm a federal judge. I have thrown evidence out of my own courtroom for less. If I pulled that footage myself out of my own truck as the person they were about to accuse, every hour of it stops being about my sister and becomes a conversation about my hands. So I went inside instead. At breakfast, Bo mentioned that the family would take care of getting my headlight fixed. There was a body shop over in Delmore that could take it Wednesday. I said, well, that's thoughtful. Then I went upstairs and called my insurance company. I told them, in the flattest customer service voice I own, that my vehicle may have been involved in an incident while in the possession of another driver, that liability was unclear, that I wanted a claim opened and the vehicle preserved in its present condition pending investigation. It took 11 minutes. The adjuster put a hold on that truck before lunch. And here's the thing, no body shop in 3 counties will touch a vehicle with an open claim and a preservation hold on it. They don't get paid, and they do get sued. Nobody had to be told no. From Monday afternoon on, there was simply no way to fix that headlight, no way to vacuum that interior, no way to make that seat go back 4 inches. It was the most boring thing I did all summer. My father found out on Tuesday when the body shop called Bo to cancel. He didn't say a word about it at supper. He passed me the green beans and asked about the drive down, and he looked at me for about a second and a half longer than a man looks at his own daughter. I have spent my whole career watching people recalculate a counsel table. You can actually see it happen. Something they had filed away, undersettled, quietly gets moved into the open column. He was starting to wonder whether the daughter he'd written off at a fish fry 21 years ago was really the woman standing in his kitchen. He didn't ask. Asking would have meant admitting there was something worth knowing. My mother refilled his tea and said the beans were from the stand out on Marley Road, and everybody agreed that they were good. Wednesday, I drove to Baptist Memorial and sat in the surgical ICU waiting room for 2 hours in the corner chair, and I did not tell one person who I was, because I wasn't anybody there and I had no business being anything else. Hal Bissett's daughter was in the chairs by the window. Her name is Renata. She had a tote bag with a puzzle book in it that she never once opened. A nurse came out to update her, and Renata did what every single person does with medical people. She tried to make him a man instead of a pelvis. She said he carried mail for 31 years, and he knew which of his old ladies were diabetic, and he'd honked twice at the ones who lived alone, so they'd come to the window, and he'd know they were still standing. She said after he retired he couldn't sit still, so he drove the youth van for the church on weekends, no pay, just gas money. She said, he stopped for those kids, he didn't have to stop. She said that twice, like it was an argument she needed to keep on winning. And on the corkboard by the coffee machine, between a flu shot notice and a sign-up sheet for a blood drive, somebody had pinned one of my sister's campaign cards. Her face, that smile, that red. And underneath, in white capital letters, the slogan a consultant had focus group for her back in March, Accountability for Baird County. I looked at that for a good while. Then I got up and put $4 in the vending machine and bought Renata Bissett a coffee she never asked for, and I set it down on the little table beside her, and I left before she could ask me my name. Thursday morning I went to see Bo Kessler alone at his office over the drugstore on Union Street because there was still a version of the world in my head where a decent man had gotten swept into something and needed one honest conversation to find his footing again. He's got a photograph on that wall of himself and my father and 2 other men holding up a stringer of crappie at Pickett Lake in 1989, and I am in the corner of that photograph, 11 years old, holding the net. He poured me coffee in a mug that said world's okayest golfer. I told him the whole thing, not as a suspect, not as a lawyer, just told him. The bowl, the keys, the seat position, the paired phone, the garage door at 5 to midnight, the dish towel. And he listened the way he used to listen when I was a kid, explaining a knot to him, nodding along, letting me get all the way to the end. And when I got to the end, he set his coffee down. And he said, "Sign it, kiddo." He said it kindly. He said the day was prepared to be reasonable. No priors, it'd be a deferred sentence. 18 months, and it's nothing but paperwork in a drawer somewhere. He said, it's the version that saves everybody. The man who taught me to bait a hook was gently explaining to me why I should take a felony for my sister, and he thought he was doing me a kindness. And on the desk between us was a yellow pad, and clipped to the top of it was a memo slip with a letterhead I recognized, because I'd read 100 filings on it my first year of practice. Office of the District Attorney General, Ray Dunphy. My father's first campaign volunteer, 1994. Rosalind came down that Tuesday and took a room at the Baird Inn out by the interstate, 40 rooms, a waffle machine, and a view of a grain elevator. The afternoon I got back from Beau's office, she made me say all of it out loud again, while she took notes in handwriting I couldn't read upside down, which I suspect is entirely on purpose. Then she told me where I actually stood, and it was worse than I'd let myself put into words. 1. The second I pull anything out of that truck myself, I'm an accused party handling my own evidence, and any competent defense attorney turns the rest of this into a hearing about me. 2. The ordinary door for all of this, the Dawes office, is a man who has been standing at my father's elbow since before I could vote, and a file can sit in an office like that for a very, very long time without anybody technically doing anything wrong. 3. And she was careful with this one, I hold a federal judicial commission, which means I do not get to be clever, not one phone call to anybody I know, not one word to a reporter ever, nothing that could ever in any light be described as a judge leaning on a case. Every ordinary advantage a person in trouble has, I had to hand back at the door. I said, so I've got the truth and no way to move it. She capped her pen. She said, data gets challenged all day long. Chain of custody, spoliation, tampering. I've done it myself and won. Then she said the thing I have thought about every week since. A witness under oath is a different animal, Maggie. Sooner or later this case is going to need your face. My fate. The one thing I had spent 16 years keeping out of every frame in that house. We did it on a Friday afternoon in the parking lot of a strip mall in Delmore because Rosalind wanted concrete, security cameras, and a business address in the record. She hired a forensic technician out of Nashville named Tessa Lindgren, and Tessa brought her own equipment, her own paperwork, and a phone on a little tripod that ran the entire time. Rosalind narrated it for the recording like a woman reading a grocery list. Date, time, location, participants, vehicle identification number, odometer. Tessa photographed the headlight, the bumper, the seat rails, the odometer, the paired device list, the dash cam mount, all of it before she touched anything. Then she pulled the camera card and the module. And when she was done, she held them out to me flat on her palm, and I stood in that parking lot in 94-degree heat and held the entire night of June the 8th in my hand for about 10 seconds. It's smaller than a key. It weighs nothing at all. Tessa asked if I wanted to review the contents before she sealed it. I said no. Rosalind's eyebrows went up about 1/4 of an inch, which from her is a shout. I said if I watch it first, then every answer I give from here on out is an answer I've had time to shape. And one day somebody is going to ask me under oath whether I saw it before I told my story, and I want to be able to say no. So Tessa put it in a paper evidence envelope and sealed the flap with red tape and signed across the seal and dated it. Rosalind signed underneath her. It went into a locked case in the trunk of a rental car. I did not know what was on it. I only knew what my truck had been awake for. And Route 41 was not the only thing it remembered that night. If you've made it this far, you already know this story isn't really about a truck. It's about who your family has decided you are, and what happens the very first time you refuse to agree with them. If you've ever been written off by the people who were supposed to know you best, tell me about it in the comments. I read them. Now let me tell you what my mother did next, because she waited for exactly the right moment, and she is very, very good at this. Sunday, there was a supper. Not a family meeting. A supper. The good plates. Pot roast with the little pearl onions, which I have loved since I was 6 years old and had not been served in that house in over a decade. My mother had gotten out the album, the fat green one. It sat at the end of the table like a third course. Sophie was there and was allowed to stay up. My father asked me about the city I live in and listened to the entire answer. Vivian passed me the rolls and said she liked my hair shorter. It was the warmest room I had been in with those people since my 20s, and every single degree of it was engineered, and knowing that did almost nothing to protect me. After Sophie went up, my mother laid her hand flat on the tablecloth and made the offer. Bo had spoken to Ray, a plea to a reduced count, no jail, community service, a deferred judgment that seals in 18 months, and then she said the part she'd been saving, and she said it soft, looking right at me. And you'd be part of this family again, Maggie. Really part of it. Sunday suppers, Sophie's birthdays, all of it. 16 years I had been standing outside that window. And my mother finally opened the door, and the price on the door was a felony and a man who was going to walk with a cane for the rest of his life. The frightening thing wasn't the offer. I've been offered things by better manipulators in worse rooms. The frightening thing was sitting at that table with the pot roast and the little onions, feeling how much of me still wanted it, and understanding for the first time that they had always known exactly how much. Hal Bissett woke up on the 19th. I heard it from a nurse's aide who recognized me from the waiting room and assumed I was a cousin. He'd come through the second surgery they'd gotten the plate in. On the 24th, they got him vertical for the first time. I was down the hall when they did it. 2 physical therapists, a walker, and a 66-year-old man with a pelvis full of hardware trying to move 8 feet across a room. It took him 5.5 minutes. When he made it to the chair, he said something I couldn't hear, and both therapists laughed, and Renata stood in that doorway with her hand over her mouth. My father told me I had nothing to lose. I sat out in that hallway and counted up what Hal Bissett had already lost. 31 years of walking 11 miles a day, gone. The doctors were saying cane, permanently. The van route he drove for free on weekends, gone, because he can't work the pedals for more than 20 minutes. 22 minutes in the weeds in the dark with a broken pelvis while a church van full of kids stood there screaming for help on a road with no cell service. And on my way out, the television bolted up in the corner of the waiting room was showing my sister at a podium in front of the courthouse in a navy blazer, saying that her family was cooperating fully with the investigation and that her heart was with the Bissett family during this difficult time. She found exactly the right catch in her voice. I have watched a lot of people testify in my life. I could not have told you it was fake. That press conference wasn't a defense, it was a frame. 2 days later, the Beard County Register ran a piece on the investigation, and buried down in the 11th paragraph was one sentence attributed to a source close to the family. The source said the vehicle belonged to a sister who was estranged from the family, who lived out of state, and who had been going through a rough patch. That's all. 3 facts, all of them technically true, arranged into a person. Estranged, out of state, going through a rough patch? I read it standing in a motel parking lot and felt something I hadn't felt since I was 26. That particular vertigo of watching a version of yourself get built by people who share your last name, and knowing that the version will always, always travel faster than you can. That evening, Sophie texted me for the first time in a month. She's 12 years old. She wrote, "Aunt Maggie, did you really do it? Nobody will tell me anything." I sat on the end of a motel bed and typed and deleted about 6 different answers. I wanted to tell that child everything. I wanted to tell her that her mother had been drinking since 4 in the afternoon and left a man in the weeds and put her aunt's name into a police statement before breakfast. And every word of that would have been true. And I would have been doing to her exactly what her grandfather did to me at a fish fry in 1999. So I wrote, "I did not. I promise you I will tell you the whole thing when it's over." And I put the phone face down, because when I told that kid the truth, I wanted it to be provable. Those are 2 different things. I drove 9 hours home on a Wednesday for one day, and it was the loneliest 24 hours of the whole summer. I went and saw the circuit's ethics counsel, a small, precise man named Arthur Kim who has an office with no windows in it, and I self-reported before anybody could discover anything, which is the only move that has ever worked in the history of this kind of trouble. I told him a member of my immediate family had implicated me in a state criminal matter, that I was likely to be a witness, and that I intended to cooperate fully. He wrote it all down. Then he gave me the rules, and they were exactly the rules I already knew and had been quietly hoping he would soften. I do not identify myself by office in connection with any of it. I do not contact anyone at the day's office, the highway patrol, or any court in any capacity other than a private citizen represented by counsel. I make no public statement of any kind. If a reporter calls me, I say nothing. He said, "You understand that in practice this means you will have fewer options than an ordinary citizen, not more." I said I did. Before I left the building, I stopped in my chambers, which were dark, stood there a minute. The robe was on the back of the door where it always is. I've worn that thing for 2 years, and it has never once made me feel like the person my family thinks I am. It has only ever felt like something I borrowed from a serious institution and had better take good care of. I locked the door and drove back to Baird County with 1 suitcase and no title at all. Whatever was coming, I'd be facing it as nobody in particular. Which, lucky for me, was the role that family had been training me for my entire life. Thursday came and I didn't sign. There was no scene. I sat in my mother's front room and said I would not be signing anything, and my father folded the newspaper and said, "All right then." That was the whole conversation. Then that house began to close, 1 room at a time, in the politest way you ever saw. Friday, my mother mentioned that Aunt Charlotte was coming through and would need the back bedroom, so I moved out to the Baird Inn. Monday, a letter came from Beau Kessler's office, on his letterhead, addressed to Rosalind. It said his firm represented the Trask family. It said that any suggestion Vivian Trask Doyle operated the vehicle was contradicted by the family's recollection. And it said in a sentence that took me 3 readings to fully appreciate that the family was prepared, if necessary, to describe how the vehicle had been made available to another driver that evening by its owner with knowledge of the circumstances. There it is. If I wouldn't be the driver, they'd make me the woman who handed the keys to a drunk. Same felony neighborhood, softer paperwork, my name in it either way. And that same afternoon, Sergeant Krause called my cell phone and asked whether I could come in Wednesday morning to the highway patrol post in Corbin Springs. And then she said, in that flat way people say a thing they've decided in advance to say a certain way, and please bring your counsel. I hung up and sat on the end of that motel bed and understood that I had been formally moved into a category. The Post at Corbin Springs is a brick building with a flag out front and a vending machine that only takes exact change. Rosalind met me in the lot. Della Krause is about 50 and has the specific patience of a woman who has been lied to professionally for 25 years and stopped taking it personally somewhere around year 6. She opened by telling us 2 things I did not expect, and both of them changed the shape of that summer. The first, 11 days earlier, the Highway Patrol had gone directly to the manufacturer with a warrant for the telematics on my truck, the company's own server copy of the paired device log and the crash event record. Nothing to do with me, nothing to do with my hands, nothing to do with my sealed envelope. The world had a second door, and it had been swinging open the whole time without asking my permission. The second, Vivian's statement had a hole in it. She had told them the household was quiet after 11:15, but a neighbor's doorbell camera across the county road had caught headlights coming down the Trask Drive at 11:32 and coming back up it at 11:58. And my sister had put herself upstairs in bed for all 26 of those minutes. Then Krause asked me to walk her through my night. I did. The bowl, the stairs, the book, the garage door at 5 to midnight, the 2 voices, the water, the empty bowl at 1 in the morning. No adjectives, no conclusions. When you've listened to 10,000 witnesses, you learn that the honest ones are boring and the liars are vivid. At the end, she flipped back a page, stopped, and read something twice. Then she looked up at me and said, "One more, occupation." I hadn't planned it. There was no moment where I decided anything. She asked a routine question off an intake sheet, and I answered it because you answer an investigator truthfully or you don't answer at all, and there's nothing in between that ends well. I said, "United States District Judge." That room got very quiet. Rosalind looked at the table. Krause didn't say anything for about 4 seconds, which is a long time in a small room. Then she wrote it down. Then she asked which district, I told her. She wrote that down too. She had one follow-up, and it was a good one. She asked why it wasn't in the file. I said, because nobody ever asked. She closed the folder, stood up, and walked us out through the front. And at the door, she put her hand out and said, "Thank you for coming in, Your Honor." And my mother was standing in the lobby. She had driven over on her own, without telling anybody, to sit in a plastic chair by that vending machine and be helpful and available and find out what was being said about her family. She was 6 feet away. She heard every word of it. I watched my mother's face do something I have seen 1,000 times from the bench and never once from her. It was not pride. Pride looks different. It was recalculation, the exact expression of a person moving an item out of the liabilities column and trying very quickly to work out what it might be worth. She said my name one time. I kept walking. Out in the lot, Rosalind asked if I was all right. I stood there with my keys in my hand, and I said, "Who's going to believe you anyway?" And then I said, "Well, I guess we're about to find out." It got back to that house inside of an hour. My father called me that evening and asked me to come by, and I said we could talk on the porch, and we did, with the door shut behind us and the yard light on and the moths going at it. I had spent the whole drive over bracing for the wrong thing. I thought he'd be angry about the concealment, or humiliated, or that somewhere in there would be one single sentence about how he wished he'd known. My father was delighted. He sat down in the wicker chair and said it was remarkable. He said it twice. And then he started working. Did I understand what this changed? A federal judge, his hands were moving now, the way they do, a federal judge who takes responsibility for a tragic accident, a woman who steps forward, who doesn't hide behind her position. He said it could be reframed inside of a week. He said Ray could be brought along. He said the story stops being a family covering for a candidate and becomes a family of public servants. And Vivian's numbers go up, not down, because voters will always forgive a family that owns its mistake. He had found a way to spend my commission. 16 years of not knowing what I did for a living. And inside of 1 hour, he had run the appraisal. And the answer was that I was worth considerably more as a confession with the title attached to it than I had ever been worth as a daughter. I sat on the porch rail and let him finish. That was the moment I stopped hoping. Not the kitchen, not the letter, not the leak to the paper. It turns out hope is the very last thing they take. And they don't even take it on purpose. They just say what they actually think out loud, and then it's gone. 2 things happened that week. On Tuesday, Ray Dunphy gave a statement to the Register saying his office had reviewed the matter, that the evidence to date did not establish who was operating the vehicle, and that he would not be charging anyone at this time. He used the word tragedy. He used the phrase, a grieving community. Hal Bissett was not dead, and nobody at that paper asked him about it. On Thursday, Bo filed his supplemental letter. 4 members of the Trask family were prepared to state that I had made my vehicle available to my sister that evening, with knowledge that she had been drinking. 4. My father, my mother, my sister, and because they needed a 4th, and she was in the house, my Aunt Charlotte, who had gone to bed at 9 o'clock. Rosalind laid it out for me in a booth at the diner by the inn. The Highway Patrol had a good file, but a state case gets prosecuted by the district attorney, and the district attorney had just publicly announced that he wasn't prosecuting. And the only thing that overrides a man like Ray Dunphy is a record so clean and so public that not charging becomes more expensive to him than charging. Sworn testimony on the record. From the one person in that house whose account contradicted the other 4, and who had nothing on earth to gain by giving it. She said, it has to be you, and it has to be in the open. Or it doesn't happen at all. Which is when I finally understood the shape of the last 5 weeks. There was exactly 1 door left in this entire thing, and it only opened from the inside. Let me stop right here for a second, because I want you to sit with the question I had to sit with that night. If telling the truth cost you your entire family, not an argument, not one bad Christmas, all of it permanently, would you still tell it? Don't answer too fast. Put it in the comments. I'll tell you in a minute what I chose and exactly what it cost me. She came to the inn on a Sunday night, alone, in an old sweatshirt with the hood down. She'd driven her own car and parked it around the side by the ice machine. No phone in her hand. I have never in my adult life seen my sister with nothing in her hand. I led her in, and she sat on the edge of the desk chair, and for about 10 minutes she was a person I had never met. She talked about being 16, about the summer all her friends went to Douglas Lake, and she went to a media training in Nashville, because Daddy had gotten her a slot through a friend, about learning to hold a smile for a photographer's 3rd try. She said that in 9th grade she got a C in chemistry, and our father didn't speak to her for 4 days. She said it the way you'd mentioned the weather. Then she looked up and she said, do you have any idea what it's like to be the only thing this family ever invested in? And I did, actually, from the other side of it. She did not apologize. That's the part I need you to hear. In that entire conversation, she never once said Hal Bissett's name. She never asked how he was. She never said she was sorry for one single thing except her own position. What she'd come to do was trade. Take the plea, she said. You're strong enough to survive being the failure. You've been doing it for years. I'm not. And for about a minute, I could see the sister I might have had, if this family had been in any other line of work. Then she stood up to go, and on her way past the window, she checked her reflection and touched her hair, and the campaign came back into her face like somebody flipping a switch. They set the meeting for Wednesday at 11, in the conference room over the drugstore. And everybody came. My father in a jacket, my mother with her handbag square in her lap, Vivian in the navy blazer, straight from a radio interview, Aunt Charlotte and Bo at the head of the table with a folder. Inside the folder was the 3rd version of my confession, and beside it, set out square on the wood, was a black fountain pen with the cap already off. I have thought a great deal about that pen. He uncapped it before I walked in. That is a man who has never once been told no in that room. Rosalind sat down and opened her briefcase, and I picked up the pen. I did. I want to be honest with you about that. I held it, and then I set it down on the table and pushed it a few inches away from me, and I said no in a voice I did not have to raise. Then Rosalind started reading. At 8:40 that morning, we had filed with the Office of the Attorney General a sworn affidavit from me describing everything I have just told you. The bowl, the keys, the seat 4 inches forward, the paired phone at 11:34, the garage door at 5 to midnight, the meeting at the kitchen counter. the typed statement. Attached to it, a formal request for the appointment of a special prosecutor, on the grounds that the district attorney has a documented 31-year political relationship with a person of interest. Attached to that, a chain of custody, affidavit from Tessa Lindgren, and a transfer receipt for one sealed evidence envelope delivered that morning to the Highway Patrol post at Corbin Springs. My father said my name. My mother said it 3 times, in 3 different registers, all the way to the door. The sharp one, then the soft one, then the one from when I was small. I did not turn around. 16 years I had been the quiet daughter of the Trask family. She died in a doorway over a drugstore on a Wednesday morning, and I left her sitting at that table with the pen. That night something slid under the door of room 14. An envelope, no stamp, my mother's handwriting. There was no letter inside. There was a photograph. Me, at 7 years old, on the front steps in a red coat, holding a cat we had for 2 years. And on the back, in ballpoint, kitchen tomorrow 9. Come alone, please. She'd underlined please. So I sat at that counter for the second time, same seat, same coffee, and my mother told me the things she has never told another living soul. On the night of June the 8th, she did not go to bed. She stayed up because there were still people in her yard and a caterer's van in the drive. She was in the front room at 5 to midnight when the garage door went up. She met Vivian in the kitchen. My sister's hands were shaking so badly she couldn't get the tea bag out of the box. And my mother went out through the mudroom and stood in that garage and looked at the right front of my truck, at the crack, at the pale scrape. And she came back inside, and she took every set of keys out of that blue bowl on the pie safe and put them in the pocket of her cardigan, not so nobody could drive, so that at 7 o'clock the next morning, when the news came on, nobody would ever be able to say what had been where. She had known since 11:59 that night. She had known when she was wiping down that doorframe with a dish towel. She had known when she poured Beau Kessler his coffee. And she had known when she came around that counter and took hold of my face with both hands and looked me in the eye and told me to say I was driving. I asked her why she was telling me now. She reached across the granite and took my hand, and she was crying, and she was also completely composed. And that's when I understood that she had not come to confess. Confession requires regret. She had come to negotiate. The hearing was the next morning at 9:30. She had 18 hours, and she used every one of them well, because my mother is the finest strategist in that family and always has been. And the proof of it is that nobody outside that house has ever heard her name. She didn't threaten me. She didn't mention the 4 affidavits or the letter or the newspaper. She held my hand on that counter, and she made me an offer. And it was the only offer in 16 years that ever had a real chance of working. Come home, she said. Not for a supper. Come home. Be our daughter again. Christmases. Sophie's graduation. Your daddy will put your picture back up on that wall. I'll do it myself. Everything you have wanted since you were 26 years old. You know it, and I know it. And then, softly, almost tenderly, all you have to do is not remember quite so clearly tomorrow. She wasn't asking me to lie. She's far too smart for that. Lying under oath is a thing they can prosecute you for. She was asking me to be uncertain, to say I couldn't be sure about the time, that I'd been asleep, that it had been a long day and a long drive, and I'd had 2 glasses of wine at a party. Nobody on God's earth could have ever touched me for it. Hal Bissett would go home with a cane and a settlement from an insurance company. My sister would be in the State House by January, and I would get my family back. And she finished it the way she finishes everything, with the sentence she taught me in a gravel parking lot when I was 26, only turned around and handed to me as a gift. Pick the story where you still have a family, sweetheart. I looked past her shoulder at that wall of photographs that stops in the year I turned 26, and I gave her my answer in one sentence, and then I drove back to the inn and slept 6 hours, which surprised me. What I said to my mother in that kitchen was this: Mama, I have spent 16 years being the version of me that was convenient. Tomorrow, I'm going to be accurate. And then I told her I loved her, because it was true, and because I wanted it on the record between us. And then I left. The Baird County Courthouse is a limestone building from 1908 with 11 steps and a handrail that wobbles. At 29 minutes past 9 the next morning, there were 2 television cameras from Nashville at the bottom of those steps and 3 reporters. They knew by then somebody at the register had run the appointment down. The headline that morning had the word judge in it, in capital letters right next to my last name. Forever. A woman put a microphone near my face and asked if I had any comment about my sister. I said no comment. She asked if I was here in my official capacity. I said I'm here as a witness. She asked one more something about the family, and I said no comment, and I went up those 11 steps and through the doors, and I did not stop. And there is no clip of me anywhere on this earth saying one word about any of it. That was the entire strategy, and it cost me more than anything else in this whole story. My father told me I had nothing to lose. He was right in a way he never once bothered to look at closely. I had nothing he had ever counted, my name, my oath, and my spine. And I was about to spend all 3 of them in one morning. Inside, that courtroom smelled like old radiators and floor wax. And in the first row, on the aisle, in a wheelchair with a cane laid across his lap and his daughter beside him, was Hal Bissett. The special prosecutor was a man named Grant Ellery, appointed 9 days earlier out of the Attorney General's office, and he had the great gift of asking short questions. I was sworn at 10:15:15. I sat in a wooden chair in a room with a ceiling fan that clicked once every rotation, and I told it in order. The blue bowl on the pie safe and what my mother started in 1987, the keys going in at 4 in the afternoon, the wine at the party, the folding tables and the equipment barn, the stairs, the second door on the left, the rattle of that bowl, the screen door banging twice, the garage at 11:57, the 2 voices arranging something underneath me, the empty bowl at 1 in the morning, the news at 7, the dish towel on the door frame, the crack in the headlight housing, the pale scrape, the seat 4 inches forward, the pair device that said 11:34 p.m. The lawyer already sitting at the counter. The typed statement with my name on it and the word panicked in it, which somebody later changed to became disoriented. I did not editorialize one time. Hesse Lindgren had testified before me and put that sealed envelope into the record, red tape, signature, date, opened in front of the clerk, and matched, line for line, against the manufacturer's own telematics that the Highway Patrol had pulled independently weeks before I ever handed anything to anybody. Then my sister's attorney stood up for cross, and he was good, and he went exactly where I would have gone. He asked how a family could possibly fail to know that their own daughter sat on a federal bench. He said it twice, with just the right amount of disbelief. And he turned toward the gallery when he said it, because he wanted the room to hear how absurd it was. And he was right. It was absurd. I let that fan click twice. Then I said, because I helped them not know it for 16 years. I made it easy. That's my share of this, counselor, and I have finished paying it. He asked me to clarify. And behind him, at the defense table, my sister started talking into her lawyer's back. Here's a thing I have learned in 11 years around criminal courtrooms. People who are coached for cameras make the worst witnesses alive, because a camera never interrupts you, and a courtroom does nothing else. Her attorney told her to sit down. She didn't. She stood up at that defense table in the navy blazer with her hands out, palms up, the gesture she uses at the end of a stump speech, and she started to reframe. She said this had been turned into something it wasn't. She said her sister had been out of this family for years, and there was context this court was not hearing. She said the word narrative out loud in a courtroom, which is a thing you can only do if you have never in your life actually been in one. The judge told her twice she would have her opportunity, and on the 3rd try she got all the way to the end of the sentence she had been circling for 7 weeks, and it came out of her at full volume in a room with a court reporter in it. It was one mistake. People like her get to fail their whole lives, and it costs them nothing. I don't get even one. Nobody moved. Hal Bissett looked at the floor. And in the 3rd row, my mother put her hand over her mouth. And I do not know to this day whether that was for her daughter at the table or her daughter in the chair. Then the judge ruled, and it was over in the flat administrative way these things are actually over. Probable cause found. Bound over, conditions of release, modified, surrender of passport. and a subpoena issued that same afternoon to Aline Trask regarding the location and handling of a set of vehicle keys on the night of June the 8th. I sat in that wooden chair while the room emptied out, and I thought about my sister asking me who was going to believe me anyway. Everybody, Vivian. That is the entire point of the building. She took a plea in November, felony leaving the scene of an accident involving serious bodily injury. 90 days in the county jail, 4 years probation, restitution, license suspended for a year. She withdrew from the race in the statement that ran 90 seconds and thanked her supporters for their trust. Bo Kessler is under investigation by the state bar for his conduct in preparing a statement for an unrepresented party. He has not written to me, and I do not expect that he will. Ray Dunphy announced in the spring that he would not seek another term and joined a firm in Nashville that does municipal bond work. My parents were never charged. Ellery looked at it hard and told Rosalind the truth, proving to a jury what a woman did with a handful of keys inside her own house was not a case he could win. I want to be honest about how that sat with me. It sat badly for about a month, and then it stopped. A courtroom is a narrow instrument. It was never going to give me what I actually needed, and by that spring I understood that what I actually needed had already happened in a doorway over a drugstore. Nothing was cleansed. That is not what happens. The party slotted a county commissioner into my sister's spot by August, and he's doing just fine. My father still has his table at the Legion breakfast on Saturdays. Al Bissett went back to driving the church van in April. Short routes only, daylight only, and one of the fathers rides along to load the equipment. The civil side settled with the insurer in the spring. It isn't enough. It's more than he'd have gotten. He bought his daughter a new water heater, and he put the rest away. I stop in whenever I'm in the county on paperwork, which I still am. He lets me buy him a coffee. Then he charges me for the pie. Arthur Kim closed my ethics file with a 2-line memo. Judge appeared as a fact witness in a family matter. No use of office. No violation. And on the shelf in my chambers, behind the desk where most judges put a picture of their family, there is now a photograph of an old mail carrier in a windbreaker standing outside a church van with one hand on a cane and the other one on my shoulder. In February, Sophie texted me. She wrote, "Mom says I'm not supposed to text you, but nobody will tell me what actually happened." I typed for a long time, and then I told her the truth, all of it, in the plainest language a 12-year-old could carry. And I did not make either one of her parents a monster, and I did not make them innocent. She wrote back, "Thank you for saying it straight. Nobody in this family ever says it straight. There's one more thing. It's small. And it's the actual reason I'm telling you any of this." In June, a new clerk started in my chambers. 24 years old, nervous, very serious about the coffee. And in her second week, in the middle of nothing at all, she asked me if I had family nearby. A year before that, I would have said no and let it go right on by, the way I let everything go by for 16 years. And she'd have written me down as a private person, and she'd have been right. Instead, I heard myself say the whole true sentence out loud. No, my family's 9 hours south, and we're not in contact, and that's because my sister injured a man with my truck, and my parents asked me to take the charge, and I testified. She did not know where to put her face. I told her it was all right, that people mostly don't know what to say, and they don't have to. And then we went back to the motion calendar. My mother was right about one thing, and I've decided to let her keep it. Families do run on stories. That part is true. But I am done telling versions. If your family only loves the version of you that stays convenient, that was never love. That was an arrangement. And you have been paying the dues on it by yourself. The day you stop auditioning is the day the rest of your life is finally allowed to start. That's my story. One empty key bowl, one sealed envelope, and one signature I never gave. If there's somebody in your life who has you filed away as the family disappointment, hear me. You do not owe anybody a smaller version of yourself. Not at Thanksgiving. Not ever. If this one stayed with you, send it to somebody who needs to hear it. Leave me a comment and tell me your story. I read every single one. And I'll see you in the next one.